Assalamualaikum and good day to Madam Hairunisa and my fellow classmates. Before we start the presentation, let me introduce myself and my group members. My name is Intan Najwa binti Mat Hussein and the other group members are Unku Nur Hairunisa binti Unku Ahmad Daniel and Siti Khalilah binti Zulkarnain. Our topic today is student rights violations, bullying, abuse, and discrimination by teachers in Malaysia. This is an important and often overlooked issue in our education system. The violations include three major concerns, which is the bullying, abuse, and discrimination. While teachers are meant to guide and educate, some unfortunately misuse their power, causing harm to the students they are supposed to protect. Imagine a school, a place meant to be a safe, nurturing, and supportive, a place where students should feel valued and respected. But what happens when that very space turns into one of the fear and injustice place for a student? Bullying by teachers can take many forms, such as harsh words, humiliation, or even excessive punishment that affects a student's self esteem. Abuse, whether physical, emotional, or verbal, can leave a long term trauma affecting both academic performance and mental health. Discrimination, based on factors like race, gender, or background, creates an unfair learning environment and denies students the equal opportunities they deserve. So, in our presentation, we will explore real cases, discuss the impact of these violations, and examine the ethical and legal responsibilities of educators. Most importantly, we will look at ways to ensure that every student in Malaysia has a safe, fair, and supportive learning environment. With that, let's begin. Okay, let's start with the definition of students' right. Every student, regardless of background, deserves to learn in a safe, fair, and supportive environment. However, in some cases, these rights are violated due to bullying, abuse, or discrimination by teachers. To better understand this, let's look at the six key rights that every student should have. Let's start with the first three, which is the right to education, the right to safety, and the right to non discrimination. All right, for the first one, the right to education. Education is a fundamental right. Every student should have access to quality learning, free from discrimination or bias. No student should be denied opportunities based on their gender, race, or socioeconomic background. For example, a student from a low income family should receive the same learning resources and attention as any other student. And schools must also create an inclusive environment that supports students with different learning abilities. If a teacher discourages a student from participating simply because they struggle academically, that is a violation of this right. Number two, the right to safety. When teachers become the bullies, we often talk about student bullying, but what about teachers who bully students? In Malaysia, there have been disturbing reports of teachers verbally abusing, physically punishing, and even humiliating students. Some just some just justify it as a discipline, but there is a clear difference between discipline and abuse. So where do we draw the line? For instance, there have been cases of teachers making sexist or racist remarks towards students, publicly shaming them in front of their peers, or even resorting to physical punishment that goes beyond reasonable discipline. So, if a student fights back, they are seen as disrespectful. Okay, but why? When the same thing done by teachers, everyone keep quiet. So this is totally wrong, but happen in real world. Schools must stop covering up such behavior and enforce strict policies to prevent teacher misconduct. And number three is the right to non-discrimination. This is the unspoken bias in schools. So discrimination in schools is very real, yet it is often ignored. While schools claim to treat all students equally, bias exists everywhere. in grading, punishment, and opportunities. Some students receive a better treatment simply because of their race, gender, or social status. For example, in some schools, certain students are favored for leadership roles or extracurricular activities, while others are overlooked based on stereotypes. In other cases, female students are shamed for their clothing, while male students get away with similar infractions. How is this fair? Shouldn't schools set an example of equality rather than reinforcing outdated prejudice? So, schools should instead promote inclusivity and ensure that every student is given equal opportunities to succeed. All right, let's continue with the student rights number 4, which is the rights to fair and respectful treatment. Are teachers always right? Respect is a two-way street, yet in many schools, students are expected to respect teachers unconditionally, while teachers are not always held to the same standard. Why? Because some educators misuse their authority, ignoring students' voices or punishing them unfairly. Disciplinary action should be fair and justified. If a teacher publicly humiliates a student for minor mistakes, so how is that acceptable? If punishments are inconsistent, where one student gets away with breaking the rules while another is severely punished, how is that fair? Schools must enforce ethical treatment for both students and teachers to prevent power abuse. And number 5 is the right to privacy and protection. Who is protecting students? So, in this globalization area, a student's privacy is constantly at risk. Schools hold sensitive information, including academic records, disciplinary history, and even personal issues. But can we trust all schools to handle this information responsibly? For example, what happens when a teacher publicly exposes a student's grades to shame them? Or when schools fail to protect students from cyberbullying within their online learning platforms? Some students have even had their private information leaked in group chats or social media, leading to harassment. Schools must have a strict policies to protect students from data misuse, both online and offline. Worse still, some students fear reporting misconduct because they believe teachers will retaliate. How can students feel safe if they worry about facing worse treatment for speaking up? So the reality is that many victims of bullying, abuse, or discrimination remain silent because they do not trust the system to protect them. So schools must change this. And the last one is the right to speak up and seek justice. Is complaining even worth it? So let's be honest, many students do not believe that reporting problems will make a difference. They fear that their complaints will be dismissed, that teachers will protect each other, or that they will face the backlash. And are they wrong to think this? Consider a case where a student reports a teacher for verbal abuse, only to be told, just ignore it, that's how they teach. Or when schools claim to have reporting systems but do nothing when complaints are made. What message does this send? So it tells students that their voices do not matter, that teachers are untouchable, and that justice in schools is just an illusion. So, if schools truly care about justice, they need to establish a clear, anonymous reporting systems, ensure that all complaints are investigated, and protect students from retaliation. No student should feel afraid to speak up against mistreatment. All right, now let's move on to the slide 4, which is ethics in teaching. So, ethical responsibilities in teaching is more than just a profession. Teaching is often described as a noble profession, but let's be honest, having a degree and standing in front of the classroom does not automatically make someone an ethical educator. As stated in the definition, ethical responsibilities in teaching ensure that educators uphold professionalism, fairness, and integrity in their interactions with students, parents, and colleagues. Ethics in teaching goes beyond following beyond just following rules. Actually, it requires conscious decisions, moral responsibility, and self-discipline. Now let's take a look at a few points that I highlight here regarding to the ethics in teaching. The first one is professional conduct and integrity. Are all teachers professional? So teachers are expected to set an example for students, but do all teachers actually practice professionalism? Some show favoritism, misuse authority, or even engage in unethical relationships with students. A teacher's personal bias, mood swings, and external frustrations should never affect their conduct in the classroom. For example, if a teacher intentionally lowers a student's mark just because they had a disagreement in class, is that professional? And if a teacher makes inappropriate comments about students' appearances or personal lives, is that integrity? Two professionals separate personal emotions from their duties and treat every student with fairness and respect. Next, we have fair and equal treatment, the hidden bias in classrooms. We love to believe that schools are fair, but bias in education is real. Teachers sometimes treat students differently based on race, gender, or even how well they perform academically. Have you ever noticed how some students always get picked for leadership roles while others are ignored? Or how some students get scolded more harshly than others for the same mistake? Imagine two students break a rule, one from a well respected family and other from a troubled background. The first one is given a warning, while the second is immediately punished. This is not discipline, this is discrimination. An ethical teacher ensures all students are given the same respect and opportunities regardless of their background. And the next point is the commitment to student welfare is more than just a job. So a good teacher should prioritizing the emotional and physical well-being of students by creating a safe and supportive learning environment. Identifying and addressing signs of abuse, bullying, or distress among students, and taking appropriate action. The teachers also need to encouraging positive reinforcement rather than humiliation or verbal abuse or harsh punishment. And an ethical teacher does not just teach subjects, they care about students as human beings. But how many teachers actually take action when a student is struggling? Some dismiss students' mental health struggles as an excuse for laziness, while others fail to notice signs of abuse at home. For example, a student constantly arrives late, looking exhausted. Instead of immediately punishing them, an ethical teacher would ask, is something happening at home, or are they facing emotional distress, or do they need guidance? Something like that. A teacher's responsibility does not stop at academics. It includes looking out for students' well being and ensuring they are in a safe and supportive environment. Next is the confidentiality and students' privacy. This is including respecting students' personal and academic information by keeping records private, avoiding the disclosure of sensitive information unless legally required or necessary for the students' well-being, and protecting students from cyber threats and ensuring online safety in digital learning platforms. So, one of the biggest ethical violations in teaching is breaching students' confidentiality. Have you ever heard teachers gossiping about students in the staff room? Or maybe discussing students' grades, family problems, or even mocking their behavior in public? For example, if a student confides in a teacher about family issues or mental health problems and the teacher shares it with colleagues or other students, that is a serious violation of trust. Schools must protect student information, both academic and personal. Ethical teachers never use a student's private struggles as entertainment or gossip material. So let's take a look at slide 5, which is the overview of the issue bullying, abuse, and discrimination by teachers in Malaysia. Bullying by teachers and unspoken crisis in education. When we hear the word bullying, we always imagine students harassing their peers. But what happens when the bully was done by the person meant to protect and guide students, which is the teacher? Teacher bullying is a serious yet often overlooked issue in Malaysian schools, affecting students' mental health, motivation, and long term confidence. So let's take a closer, critical look at how this happens, its damaging effects, and why it's a bigger issue than we admit. So, what does teacher bullying look like? Teacher bullying goes beyond strict discipline. It involves verbal humiliation, excessive punishment, intimidation, and even physical aggression. Some teachers justify their behavior by claiming they are motivating students, but in reality, they break students down instead of building them up. For example, verbal bullying. The teacher shaming students for low grades, mocking their accents, weight, or appearance, or using derogatory nicknames like slow learner, dumb, or useless. Psychological intimidation, which is threatening students with severe punishment for small mistakes, embarrassing them in front of peers, or constantly comparing them to others. And the third one is excessive physical punishment, which is caning students harshly, making them stand in the sun for hours, or forcing them to do extreme physical activities as punishment. So I give you real life cases when teachers cross the line. Number one is public humiliation over grades. This is a real case in Selangor in 2022. Involved a teacher who forced students to stand on chairs while publicly announcing their exam scores. Those who failed were ridiculed in front of the class, leading to tears, emotional distress, and a fear of attending school. Instead of helping students improve, the teacher crushed their confidence and made learning a source of fear. Using inappropriate nicknames and labels. Some teachers think it's funny to give students insulting nicknames based on their weaknesses. For example, a teacher calling a slow reader as Mr. Turtle in front of the class, or maybe he called a weak English speaker being mocked as smart rapid English, for example. This might seem harmless or even humorous to some, but for the student, it's a form of psychological abuse that stays with them for years. Number three is unfair punishment and physical abuse. In some cases, teachers cross line from discipline into abuse. For example, a teacher in Kelantan 2019 was reported for slapping students who failed to answer question correctly. And a school in Johor in 2021 made students crawl on the floor as a punishment for talking during class. And in Terengganu in 2020, a teacher was caught hitting a student with a book for forgetting homework. For a long term impact, a wound that doesn't heal. The effects of teacher bullying do not end in the classroom. Victims often carry the trauma into adulthood, experiencing fear of authority figures, maybe difficulty trusting teachers, bosses, or mentors. And maybe they will face the anxiety and depression, loss of confidence, social withdrawal, and also academic struggles, which is associating school with humiliation and stress. And many victims later report that they lost their love for learning due to traumatic experiences with teachers. Next, we have physical and emotional abuse by teachers, a betrayal of trust. Teachers are meant to be protectors, role models, and guides. However, when physical and emotional abuse replace discipline and support, the school environment becomes a place of fear instead of learning. Unfortunately, cases of teacher inflicted abuse in Malaysia continue to surface, sparking national debates on where discipline ends and abuse begins. Let's critically examine the effects, real life cases, and the consequences of normalizing such behavior. So, understanding physical and emotional abuse. Physical abuse is something includes action like slapping, hitting, caning, pinching, or throwing objects at students, and excessive physical punishment such as making students stand for hours or do extreme exercises or kneel on hard floors. Unjustified force that cause injuries, bruises, or even hospitalization. Emotional abuse. This is less visible but equally damaging and includes verbal insults, name calling, or belittling students in front of their peers. Threats of extreme punishment, for example, I will fail you for a year, or I will make sure you regret coming to school. So, this psychological manipulation to make students feel worthless or fearful. I give you the real life cases when teachers cross the line. Case 1, the Kedah slapping incident in 2023. One of the most shocking cases in Kedah involved a teacher who slapped a student multiple times for failing to complete homework. The student suffered bruises and hearing problems, and the incident went viral, leading to national outrage. Many defended the teacher, claiming students today are too soft, while others argued that physical violence has no place in modern education. Case number 2, verbal abuse in Johor in 2022. A teacher in Johor was caught on camera calling students stupid and a disgrace in front of their classmates. The teacher repeatedly mocked students for failing tests, saying they were not smart enough to have a future. And the case number 3, which is the excessive punishment in Terengganu, happened in 2021. In a boarding school in Terengganu, students who talked in class were punished by being forced to run in the hot sun for an hour. Some collapsed from exhaustion, and some student was hospitalized due to heart stroke. So, for the long-term impact, the hidden damage of abuse. When students experience physical or emotional abuse, they don't just suffer in the moment; it shapes their entire future. Some the long some of the long-term consequences include the post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the PTSD. Many students develop fear, anxiety, and panic attacks whenever they remember their experiences. And they also may experience loss of confidence, like the victims often struggle to trust teachers, authority figures, and even themselves. And hostile learning environment. Students may start to hate school, refuse to participate, or even drop out. Aggressive or withdrawn behavior. Some students become bullies themselves while others shut down emotionally. Discrimination in schools. How does discrimination manifest in schools? Discrimination is not always overt. Sometimes it is hidden behind school policies, teacher behavior, or social bias that have existed for decades. The devastating effects of discrimination on students. So, when students face systematic discrimination, the consequences go beyond just hurt the feelings. They affect mental health, academic performance, and future opportunities. The first effect is creates inequality in education. Students in segregate classrooms receive fewer resources and lower quality teaching, setting them up for failure in the long run. And those who are denied leadership roles or excluded from competitions miss out on opportunities to build confidence and skills. Next is a lower self-esteem and participation. When students constantly hear that they are not good enough, they start believing it. Many withdraw from extracurricular activities or stop speaking up in class because they feel unwelcome. And the third one is leads to social exclusion. A school that discriminates creates divisions among students, making it harder for them to bond with peers from different backgrounds. Bullying becomes more common as students begin to internalize this bias and act upon them. So I give you a real case example. A student in Penang was reportedly told by a teacher that Bahasa Malaysia is not your mother tongue, so you will always be weak in it. Instead of helping the student improve, the teacher's words reinforce a racial stereotype. The other cases was happened in 2022. A female student from Johor was denied the opportunity to represent her school in a debate competition just because the teacher believed a male student would be more confident on stage. This is not only crushed her motivation but also denied the school a talented participant. Next is the psychological impact of teacher misconduct. A silent crisis in schools So, how teacher misconduct affects students' mental health? Psychological harm caused by teachers is often dismissed because it doesn't leave physical scars. But words and actions can wound as deeply as the physical one. Increased risk of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thought. So, I give you the real case. A study in Malaysia found that students who experienced a verbal abuse from teachers were significantly more likely to develop anxiety disorders. For example, in 2022, a student in Sabah took extreme measures after being repeatedly insulted by a teacher for stuttering. The teacher mocked him in front of classmates, calling him slow and hopeless. Instead of encouraging the student, the teacher's words pushed him into isolation, depression, and eventually self harm. Number two is loss of trust in authority figures. When a teacher abuses their power, students begin to believe that authority figures cannot be trusted. This affects their relationships with future mentors, employers, and even family members. In extreme cases, it can lead to rebellion, avoidance of authority, or even aggression toward figures of power. For example, a student in Perak was humiliated by a teacher for crying after getting scolded in class. The teacher said, "If you are so weak, you don't belong in school." After that incident, the student refused to participate in discussions, avoided asking for help, and developed social anxiety. Years later, this same student found it difficult to trust supervisors at work, fearing ridicule and criticism. How teacher misconduct affects legal policies and public perception. The first one is increase in complaints and legal actions against teachers. With the rise of social media and advocacy groups, more cases of teacher misconduct are being exposed, forcing authorities to take legal action. Real case in 2022, a student in Johor filed a police report against a teacher who publicly slapped him for mispronouncing a word in English class. The case went viral, forcing the Ministry of Education to investigate and suspend the teacher pending disciplinary action. I give you another example. In 2023, a viral video showed a teacher in Kedah forcing a student to kneel for hours as punishment. After massive public outrage, the teacher was suspended but not fired. This sparked debates about whether Malaysia's teacher disciplinary system is too lenient. Number two is public distrust in the education system and demand for stricter policies. Every time a new case of teacher misconduct goes viral, public confidence in Malaysia's education system declines further. Parents lose trust and start questioning: Is my child really safe at school? Or maybe teachers are properly trained to handle students with respect? Or why do abusive teachers get away with their actions? So I give you another example. In 2021, a teacher in Selangor was exposed for making racially insensitive comments towards non-Malay students. Despite public backlash, no severe action was taken, leading to protests and demands for education reform. So, in the critical perspective, how can Malaysia build a world class education system if students fear their teachers more than they respect them? Are schools protecting students' rights or just protecting teachers from accountability? This growing distrust has pushed parents and advocacy groups to demand harsher penalties for teacher misconduct, mandatory ethics training for educators, a transparent complaint system where students feel safe to report abuse. And the third one is calls for reform, stricter guidelines and ethical training for teachers. In response to these growing issues, the Malaysian government has started implementing new reforms. But are they enough? In 2023, the Ministry of Education introduced new guidelines that emphasize the zero tolerance for physical and emotional abuse in schools, mandatory ethical training for new teachers, stronger protections for students who report misconduct, and yeah, that's it. And for example, after a high profile abuse case in Perak, the government introduced a policy requiring all teachers to undergo ethics training every 5 years. However, critics argue that training alone is not enough. There must be real consequences for teachers who break the rules. So the final thought is what needs to change. Teacher misconduct is not just a student's issue. It is a national crisis that affects public trust, school safety, and the future of education in Malaysia. So we need to take a stronger legal action. Teachers found guilty of misconduct should face strict penalties, including dismissal and legal consequences. We need a transparent complaint system where the students need a safe way to report abuse without fear of retaliation and changing the culture. Teachers must understand that respect is earned through positive influence, not through fear, intimidation, or discrimination. At the end of the day, a great education system is built on trust, fairness, and accountability. If Malaysia wants to create a future of empowered students, it must start by protecting them today. So that's all from me. My friends will continue the presentation. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. I bid to Madam Khairunisa and my fellow friends. I'm Siti Khalila binti Zulkarnain. Will continue the presentation. So, mine is about traditional discipline in Malaysian schools, culture or harm. Okay, discipline is a cornerstone of education, which shaping students into responsible and ethical individuals. However, in many Malaysian schools, traditional disciplinary methods rooted in cultural and social norms have often blurred the line between correction and abuse. While intended to instill discipline, some practices have led to long-lasting psychological harm, physical injury, and even fatal consequences. So, I'm going to explore the underlying factors behind these methods, their impact on students, and the urgent need for change. Okay, one of the most common disciplinary methods in our education system in Malaysian schools is the corporal punishment, where it's particularly the use of the rotan, the cane, which caning is often seen as an acceptable way to enforce discipline with teachers and even parents spotting its use. So the argument is that students need to be toughened up and that physical punishment ensures they learn from their mistakes. However, when taken too far, corporal punishment can cause more harm than good. Okay, for example, a tragic example occurred in Johor Bahru in 2017, where an 11 years old student at a private religious school was severely beaten with a rubber horse for making noise. So his injuries became infected, leading to the amputation of his legs and ultimately his death. So this case shocked the nation, which raising serious concerns about the lack of regulation and oversight regarding the corporal punishment. Despite such extreme incidents, many schools still justify the practice as an effective disciplinary tool. Okay, next, the respect through fear mentality. Okay, another deeply ingrained belief in Malaysian education is that fear equals to respect. Okay, many teachers and parents believe that strict discipline, including shouting, humiliation, and excessive punishment, can foster obedience and builds resilience. Then the phrase kalau cikgu marah maksudnya cikgu sayang. If the teacher scolds you, it means they care. Is commonly heard, where it reinforces the notion that harsh treatment is a form of care and guidance. So for this example, I found a news that in Kota Kinabalu in 2016, this mentality took a dangerous turn when an 8-year-old student um, was hit on the head by a wooden chair thrown by a teacher. So the teacher, in frustration, had aimed the chair at another student, but ended up injuring an innocent child, where the child required 8 stitches. So the fact that such incidents often result in mere apologies rather than legal consequences highlights the normalization of fear-based discipline. Okay, the next one, the cultural justification of teacher authority in Malaysia. So, in Malaysia, teachers are often regarded as secondary parents. Okay, this is a concept deeply embedded in cultural values. Why? Actually, this can create a nurturing relationship. It also grants teachers unchecked authority, where it's leading to instances of abuse. Okay, a particularly troubling case occurred in Tasik Gelugu, Penang, in 2022, where a 13-year-old girl was allegedly forced to kneel with her hands raised during an assembly for not wearing laced shoes. Okay, the teacher then cut off her religious wrist thread and removed the holy ash from her forehead. So these actions that were seen as highly disrespectful to her religious belief. Okay, such incidents actually demonstrate how some teachers misuse their authority, not only punishing students but also disregarding cultural sensitivity and the students' dignity. Okay, the next one is the overlooked psychological harm. Okay, while physical punishment is widely discussed, psychological harm is often dismissed as insignificant, where verbal abuse, public humiliation, and emotional neglect can leave deeper scars than the physical beatings. For example, calling a student bodoh, stupid, or shaming them in front of the class can actually destroy their self-esteem and motivation. Okay, in 2014, a teacher physically assaulted multiple students, including punching a Form 1 girl for accidentally splashing water on his clothes. Okay, while the physical injuries healed, the emotional trauma persisted. Okay, students who experience such treatment often develop anxiety, fear of authority figures, and even depression. So, many teachers and parents subscribe to the belief that students must be disciplined harshly to prepare them for the real world. Okay, this leads punishment such as standing in the sun for hours, writing repetitive lines, or being denied recess. However, these methods do not teach responsibility. Instead, they create resentment and create fear towards the student. Okay, there's a disturbing case in 2016 uh, where a 14-year-old boy who was canned so severely that the marks remained visible for 2 months. The teacher justified it as a necessary corrective measure, but the severity of the injuries suggested excessive force. Okay, such incidents show that traditional discipline can sometimes cross the line into abuse. Okay, the next one is the cycle of generational teaching practices. Okay, many older teachers believe that because they endured strict discipline in their school years, it is acceptable to continue these practices. Okay, the phrase saya dulu kena pukul, tak ada masalah pun. I was beaten before and I turned out fine. I'm a teacher now. Is commonly used to justify the continuation of the corporal punishment. However, in this era, this mindset ignores the evolving research on child psychology and modern educational approaches. Okay, for instance, um, there's a case in Petaling Jaya in 2016. A mathematics teacher was charged in court for pinching a 9-year-old student's ear, which it caused injury. So while the teacher likely believed this was a minor act, the legal action taken against him showed a shift in attitudes towards such punishment. Okay, and then the weak enforcement of child protection laws. Okay, despite Malaysia having laws to protect children from abuse, enforcement in schools remain inconsistent. Okay, many cases go unreported because students fear retaliation or parents believe the teacher knows the best. Even when complaints are made, um, action is often slow or minimal. For example, uh, in Kota Tinggi, Johor, a private religious boarding school faced legal action after a student was found weak, bruised, and hospitalized for 2 weeks due to excessive punishment. So while this case received media attention, many similar incidents remain hidden. Um, with school preferring to handle matters internally rather than facing scrutiny. Okay, so I urge to rethinking the discipline. The need for change discipline about should be about guidance, not fear. So the school must move away from punitive methods and adopt positive enforcement strategies. Some schools in Malaysia have already begun implementing alternative disciplines approaches such as restorative justice, where students reflect on their mistakes and make amends rather than simply being punished. And then train the teacher in modern disciplinary techniques is crucial. Okay, more emphasis should be placed on counseling, mentorship, and conflict resolution rather than physical or emotional punishment. Moreover, strict policies should be enforced to ensure that students' rights and dignity are upheld. So the conclusion is while while the traditional discipline in Malaysian schools has been deeply rooted in cultural and social norms, I think it is time for the change. Okay, the corporal punishment, the verbal abuse, and the excessive authority must be challenged. Okay, schools should be safe spaces for learning and growth, not places of fear and punishment. Only by shifting toward a more compassionate and supportive approach to discipline can can we truly nurture students into responsible, into confident and well-rounded individuals, aligned with the KPM Malaysia Education Blueprint. Okay, next issue is when teachers aren't trained enough. Okay, so the hidden crisis in Malaysian schools. Teaching is more than just standing in front of class and delivering lessons. It's about understanding students, guiding them through challenges, and creating a supportive learning environment. But what happens when teachers themselves aren't trained adequately? So, in Malaysia, a lack of proper teacher training has led to various issues, from ineffective teaching methods to mishandling student concerns. So, let's break down these challenges with a real life example and explore why proper training is more crucial than ever. Okay, the first one is limited training on students' rights. Okay, let's imagine this. A student speaks up against unfair treatment in class only to be dismissed or worse, punished for questioning authority. So this scenario is far too common in Malaysian school, where many teachers are unaware of students' rights. So let's take the case in Penang in 2022, where a teacher forcefully cut a student's religious thread and wiped off the ash marking. It's completely disregarding her religious belief. So if the teacher had been trained on students' right, this incident could have been avoided. But unfortunately, many teachers don't receive proper guidance on respecting ignoring student autonomy and the students' cultural differences, where it's leading to unnecessary conflicts. Okay, the second one is outdated teaching approaches. Okay, some teachers still rely on rote memorization, making students copy notes endlessly rather than encouraging critical thinking. Okay, this is especially true, yes, very true in rural areas, including me, where educators often stick to methods they were taught in decades ago. For example, in Kelantan, a teacher was reported to have made students stand on their chairs for failing to recite a textbook definition correctly. So the problem? This approach doesn't foster understanding, it just creates fear. It is because without training in modern teaching strategies, many educators continue to use ineffective methods that disengage students rather than inspire them. Because today is new era, today is new Gen Z era. Okay, the next one, absence of emotional and psychological training. Okay, so handling students' emotions is just as important as teaching them subjects. However, many teachers lack training in recognizing signs of stress, um, anxiety, or depression in their students. Okay, one tragic case happened in Perak, where a 13-year-old student took his own life after being humiliated by a teacher in front of the class. Okay, the teacher had scolded him harshly for not completing his homework, unaware that the student was already dealing with personal struggles. So, actually, with proper psychological training, teachers could be more sensitive to students' emotional well being, where it can prevent such heartbreaking outcomes. Okay, next, insufficient professional development. Okay, now many teachers in Malaysia go years without attending professional development courses, unlike countries like Finland, where continuous teacher training is a priority. Okay, so Malaysian educators often rely on outdated knowledge. So a classic example was seen during COVID-19 pandemic, where many teachers struggled with online teaching. While some adapted quickly, others had difficulty using digital tools due to a lack of prior training. So, if professional development was a regular part of the education system, the transition to remote learning would have been much smoother. Okay, next point, poor handling of students' complaints. Okay, so how often do students' complaints actually lead to change? Sadly, not very often. Many students feel unheard because teachers and administrators are not trained in conflict resolution. Okay, for example, the bullying case in 2018 happened in Selangor boarding school, where seniors severely beat a Form 1 student. Despite multiple reports, the school management failed to take action until the issue went viral on social media. So proper training in handling complaints could have ensured a quicker response, potentially preventing the assault from escalating. Okay, the next one, inconsistent enforcement of ethical standards. Okay, so one of the biggest concern in Malaysian schools is the inconsistency in disciplining teachers for misconduct. Okay, some teachers get away with inappropriate behavior, while others face severe consequences for minor infractions. Okay, so I take the case in Johor in 2021. A teacher made a rape joke during a lesson, and when the student reported it, she was dismissed as too sensitive. Okay, so this sparked a nationwide discussion on teachers' ethics, leading to calls for better enforcement of ethical standards in school. If all teachers were trained on proper conduct, these incidents could be significantly reduced. Okay, next one is the lack of training on inclusive education. Okay, inclusive education ensures that students with disabilities and learning difficulties receive the same opportunities as everyone else. That's the definition. Unfortunately, many teachers lack the training to support these students effectively. For, inten- um, for instance, a teacher in Kuala Lumpur was criticized in 2020 for punishing a dyslexic student for failing to copy notes correctly. The teacher didn't recognize the student condition and assumed he was lazy. If the teacher been trained in inclusive education, they would have approached the situation with understanding instead of punishment. Okay, next, minimal awareness of alternative disciplinary methods. Okay, traditional discipline methods like scolding, caning, or public shaming are still widely practiced in Malaysia, despite the evidence showing they are ineffective. Teachers often don't know about alternative methods such as positive reinforcement, restorative justice, or counseling based discipline. For example, a school in Sabah implemented a new approach where students were encouraged to reflect on their mistakes through guided discussion instead of receiving punishment, like I said before. Okay, so the result actually it improved the student behavior and better relationship between the teachers and the students. So if more schools adopted such methods, discipline wouldn't have to rely on fear and on the punishment. Okay, so the way forward, training teachers for a better future. So what can be done? Okay, first, continuous teacher training should be mandatory, where it covers student rights, modern teaching methods, emotional intelligence, and inclusive education. So schools must also introduce stricter guidelines on ethical behavior while providing better resources for professional development. Okay, second, teachers need more hands-on workshops rather than one-off seminars. Okay, learning how to handle a classroom, address students' mental health, and use innovative teaching strategies requires practical experience. And finally, education policies should be reformed to ensure every teacher, whether in an urban or rural area, receive equal access to training. It's not just about creating better teachers, it's about creating a better education system that supports every student's growth. Okay, moving forward to the next issue, which is when rules exist but aren't enforced. Okay, so the hidden crisis in Malaysian schools, laws, and policies are supposed to protect students, ensure fair treatment, and maintain discipline in schools. But what happens when those rules are barely enforced? Okay, in Malaysia, weak policy enforcement has allowed teacher misconduct, student abuse, and unfair treatment to continue without serious consequences. So, despite having laws in place, inconsistent monitoring, lack of transparency, and fear of speaking up prevent real change. So, I will go through this problem through real life cases that prove why stronger enforcement is desperately needed. Okay, the first one is the lack of strict monitoring and oversight in Malaysian education system. So imagine a teacher is reported for misconduct, but instead of facing an investigation, they are simply transferred to another school. Okay, actually, this happens more often than people think, all because there's no proper monitoring system in place. Okay, example, as I said before, the rape joke controversy where a male teacher joked about rape in front of his students. So when a student named Ain Husniza spoke up about against him, the school's response was defensive rather than investigative. Instead of taking immediate action, the authorities downplayed the incident. Um, if there been a proper monitoring system, the issue could have been handled professionally rather than turning into a nationwide controversy. Okay, the next one, inconsistent enforcement of existing laws. Okay, as we know, Malaysia has laws like the Education Act 1996 and the Child Act 2001 that are meant to protect students. But enforcement depends on the school, district, or even the mood of the authorities. Some cases result in immediate punishment, while others are ignored completely. So, for instance, in Johor in 2019, a student was severely caned by a teacher for failing to complete his homework, like I said before. The punishment left visible injuries, and while corporal punishment is technically regulated, the school dismissed the complaint as normal discipline. However, in a similar case in Penang, the same year, a teacher who caned a student was suspended immediately. So, the inconsistency makes it hard for students and parents to trust the system. Okay. Next point, the fear of repercussions and lack of students' protection. Okay, many students are afraid to speak up about mistreatment because they fear punishment or retaliation. The sad truth is that when students do report abuse, they often face consequences instead of the guilty teacher. So, a case in Kota Baru in 2018, a student complained about a teacher's aggressive behavior only to be scolded by the principal and accused of being disrespectful. Okay, the student was later isolated from class discussions and ignored by the teachers. So, without proper protection policies, the students remain silent, where it's allowed misconduct to continue unchecked. That's the sad truth. Okay, the next one is weak complaint and investigations mechanism. Um, Reporting teacher misconduct in Malaysia can feel like throwing a letter into the wind. Most of the time, nothing happens. Complaints are often met with delays, denials, or dismissals, making students and parents lose their faith in the system. So there are a disturbing case in 2017 involved a female teacher in Kuala Lumpur who slapped a student multiple times for asking too many questions in class. When the parent reported it, the school simply told the teacher to apologize and the case was closed. There was no formal investigation, no disciplinary action, and no review of the teacher's behavior. So, without proper investigative procedures, students remain vulnerable to the similar treatment. Okay, next, um, minimal minimal consequences for offending teachers. Even when teachers are caught mistreating students, the consequences are often light. Some get a warning letter, others are temporarily suspended, and in many cases, they are simply transferred to another school. So this lack of strict consequences allows bad behavior to continue. Okay, for example, in Sabah in 2020, where a teacher was caught on video verbally abusing students, calling them names and humiliating them in front of their peers. So the video went viral, uh, but the only action taken was a mild reprimand. Without stronger consequences, these teachers return to the classroom and repeat the same behavior. Okay. The next one is mm, lack of awareness and training on policy implementation. Okay. So, teachers and school administrators aren't even fully aware of the policies that govern student protection and teacher conduct. So, this leads to poor handling of misconduct cases and a lack of accountability. Okay, for example, in Malacca in 2021, a school allowed an unqualified teacher to teach for years, despite multiple complaints about their poor teaching quality and inappropriate behavior toward the students. Okay, the issue was only addressed when the media exposed it, where it proved that without awareness and training, schools can fail to uphold even even the most basic policies. Okay, number seven, um, weak legal support for the victims. Okay, if a student is mistreated by a teacher, taking legal action is an uphill battle. Most families don't have the resources or knowledge to fight for justice, and many are pressured into staying silent to avoid the conflict between the teachers, schools, and the students. So, a heartbreaking case in Kedah in 2016 involved a 12-year-old boy who was physically abused by his religious school teacher. So, the case was reported, but legal proceedings dragged on for years. And in the end, the teacher only received a light a light penalty. So, with stronger legal support, victims wouldn't have to fight alone to seek for the justice. The last one, lack of public accountability and transparency. So, many schools prefer to handle misconduct cases internally, avoiding media attention or government involvement. So, this lack of transparency makes it difficult to track how many cases actually receive a proper resolutions. For example, in Tanah Merah, a boy involved in murder case and until now didn't get the justice because all been settled eternally. So cases like this highlight the importance of public accountability. Without it, students continue to suffer in silence. The family continue to suffer in silence. Okay, next issue implication is on psychological effects on students in Malaysia. The first one is anxiety. So anxiety is one of the most prevalent mental health concerns among Malaysian students. So the intent focus on academic performance in Malaysian schools, especially the Sijil Pelajar Malaysia SPM examination, creates an environment where students feel immense pressure to succeed. So this pressure often results in anxiety as students fear disappointing their parents, teacher and peers. For example, in 2019, a student in Johor reportedly experienced severe anxiety and panic attacks during her preparation for the SPM exams. So, despite seeking medical help, she struggled to cope with the overwhelming expectation placed on her. So, this is not an isolated case. Because many Malaysian students are subjected to similar pressures, leading to a high level of anxiety and stress. So, research from the Malaysian Health Association has pointed out that exam related stress is a major contributor to mental health issues among the teenagers. Okay, the second one, depression. Depression among students is another alarming consequence of the education system, emphasis on academic achievement. So, the lack of psychological support and understanding of mental health in many schools lead to many students suffering silently. So, there's tragic case where a student took his own life because she's struggling depression to perform well in academic. So the student had been bullied and constantly told by his parents that his success was tied to his academic results. So his case highlight for greater mental health awareness and support structures in schools. Additionally, incidents of cyberbullying on social media platform like the case of a student in Penang who was harassed after posting exam results has further contributed to depression and suicidal ideation. Okay, then the school phobia, fear of school. Also a growing concern in Malaysia, particularly among students who experience bullying, harsh disciplinary practices, or general unhappiness in their learning environment. So in many cases, students develop a fear of attending school due to negative experiences with peers or teachers. For example, A girl in Selangor have developed school phobia after being bullied by her classmates. She began skip the school and display sign of severe emotional distress. So the school inability to address the bullying situation contributed to her worsening mental health and school avoidance. So this incident common in both urban and rural school, and they often go unaddressed until they escalate. Okay, and then low self-esteem. Okay. Malaysian students who do not perform well in core subjects like mathematics and science often face feeling of inadequacy because the pressure to conform to a standard of academic excellence can leave students feeling worthless, particularly those from marginalized communities or lower income backgrounds who may not have access to same resources as their peers. So, one case in Perak, a student feel low self-esteem because the teacher and classmate mocked him because he got a very low grade in mathematics. So, this case highlight the crucial need for a shift towards a more inclusive, supportive educational environment that values effort and personal growth rather than just the exam results. So, my suggestion for addressing these psychological effects, the first one is mental health education and support. Malaysia must prioritize the mental well-being of students while integrating mental health education into the curriculum and providing access to counseling services. So, school should create safe spaces for students to speak about their concern. That's it. Okay, next is impact on academic performance in Malaysian schools. So in Malaysian schools, the consequences of poor discipline practices, teacher misconduct, and the lack of psychological support are not only emotional but have a far-reaching effect on students' academic performance. So the ripple effect can be seen in areas such as students' focus and concentration, interest in learning, class participation, and overall performance in exam. Okay, the first one, lack of focus and concentration. So students who experience constant fear of punishment or psychological abuse struggle to focus in class. Teachers who rely on harsh disciplinary tactics such as corporal punishment or public humiliation often create an environment of tension and anxiety that distracts students from their lessons. Okay, for example, in Johor Bahru, the case of a student being severely beaten by a teacher for minor misconduct resulted in the child being hospitalized for months, which not only caused physical harm but left lasting emotional scars. So after the incident, the affected student demonstrated a significant decline in focus and performance as he struggled with flashbacks and a heightened sense of fear around authority figures. So this led to a noticeable drop in academic performance as the anxiety took priority over engaging with the coursework. Okay, number two, loss of interest in learning. So students subjected to fear-based discipline often lose their intrinsic motivation for learning. Okay, for example, in Kota Baru, there are students who emotionally distressed stop to come to class after publicly humiliated by a teacher in front of the class. So this experience of humiliation led to disengagement from learning and inability to focus on schoolwork. So the students' academic performance deteriorated significantly, where it illustrates how emotional trauma can result in disengagement from education. In many schools across Malaysia, students who are regular humiliation, excessive punishment, or lack of emotional support often lost their passion for learning. So this loss of interest, students may no longer see education as a source of empowerment or for their personal growth. Okay, then the increased absenteeism, especially when compounded by an unsupportive and abusive school environment. It contributes to increased absenteeism. So, uh, students who constantly bullied by peers and ignored by the teachers uh, can cause the student to skip. class regularly, resulting in poor academic performance and eventually contributing to their decision to drop out of school altogether. So, in many instances, students who experience chronic bullying or harsh discipline opt to avoid it, and eventually dropout rates become higher. So Malaysia Education Ministry has highlighted that students who lower socio-economic backgrounds are more likely to drop out due to academic and emotional struggles linked to inadequate school support. Okay, number four, poor exam performance. So the emotional toll of harsh discipline and unresolved psychological issues often manifest in students' exam result. So a student who is unable to manage their stress or anxiety due to poor mental health may struggle to perform well in exams, despite having the potential to excel in the exam. So, despite being an academically capable student, the emotional distress affected the student ability to concentrate during the exam, leading to unsatisfactory grades. Moreover, um, students who do not receive the emotional and psychological support they may develop anxiety and depression. So the ministry has acknowledged the need for mental health support in schools, especially since academic achievement is so heavily tied to a student's mental well-being. Okay, number five, reduce participation in class. Fear-based discipline and inadequate teacher-student relationship also affect student participation. Students who are intimidated by teachers are less likely to engage in class discussion, ask questions, or offer their insights. So several students too shy away from participating in class discussion out of fear of or further humiliation. So this lack of engagement not only hinders their academic growth, but it can also influence the dynamic within the class, as other students may mirror this behavior. So class participation is a vital component in the classroom, yet many students affected by poor discipline practices are unable to contribute in class, missing out on opportunities for both personal and academic development. So schools do not foster an open supportive environment are likely to see a decrease in active learning and participation. So to address these academic performance impacts, school must prioritize not only academic excellence but also students' mental health and emotional well-being. So, by adopting positive discipline strategies and fostering a safe and inclusive school environment are essential steps in ensuring that students thrive academically and emotionally. So, by enhancing the enforcement of child protection law, ensuring that teachers are adequately trained to address the psychological needs of their students, Malaysia can take significant strides towards improving both the emotional and academic outcomes of its students, because the relationship between psychological well-being and academic performance is undeniable, and addressing the root causes of emotional distress in schools is essential for ensuring that students succeed not just in exam but also in life. The last issue that were presented by me is the long-term social effects in Malaysian students. Okay, so the long-term social effects of poor discipline practices, teacher misconduct, and the absence of psychological support extend far beyond the immediate school years. So these experiences can shape students' interactions, attitude towards education, and mental health well into adulthood. So in Malaysia, the repercussion of such issues are becoming increasingly evident in young adults' career, relationships, and mental well-being. So the first one, difficulty in building healthy relationship. So students who endure severe punishment or emotional trauma at school may struggle to form healthy, trusting relationship later in life. Constant exposure to a fear of humiliation creates an environment where trust is broken and students are less likely to engage with others in positive or open manner. So the students who experience years of bullying and corporal punishment reveal that as an adult, they had significant difficulties in developing relationship, both in personal and professional settings. So the emotional scars led to difficulty in trusting colleagues, friends, and even their family members. It's often perceiving criticism of personal attack. So dislike engage in cooperative work environments, friendships, and even family dynamics, where communication and mutual respect are the key. So as this individual grow older, they may struggle forming lasting healthy relationship, often isolating themselves due to fear of vulnerability. Okay, second one, low self-confidence in career and education. So the long-term damage to self-esteem from negative school experience can also hinder career progression and their educational pursuits. When students face constant verbal or physical abuse, they may internalize the belief that they are incapable of succeeding, where it lead to low self-confidence and fear of failure. For instance, a student who endure emotional abuse from a teacher begin to believe that they were not good enough. So this lack of self-belief continued into adulthood, where the individual struggle to advance in their career despite having the necessary skills and qualification. So students who endure negative discipline experience may also be less likely to take risks or apply for educational opportunities, which fearing they are bound to fail or face rejection. So this can limit their professional and educational growth, creating a cycle of underachievement that often stems from the emotional damage sustained in earlier years. Okay, the third one, higher in the issue of teacher misconduct often leads to long-term mental health issues. So chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and PTSD can manifest in individuals who have experienced trauma in school. So, students who get excessive corporal punishment develop anxiety that persisted into adulthood because it's leading to a diminished quality of life. Moreover, the lack of psychological support during formative years can affect the students. As the students grow older, their unresolved emotional issues often manifest as long-term conditions such as depressions, chronic anxiety, and even suicidal tendency. So the lack of mental health awareness and access to therapy in Malaysian schools contributes to the perpetuation of these issues as many students go untreated. Okay, then negative attitude towards education. So a significant number of students who have experienced harsh discipline or psychological trauma often develop negative attitude toward education altogether. For these individuals, school becomes synonymous with fear, stress, and failure rather than a space for growth and learning. So the student who experience a harsh discipline by multiple teachers will begin to reject the notion of formal education, where it led them to quit the school early, opting for informal work instead. So, such negative perception of education can deter individuals from further academic pursuits and impact their ability to succeed in higher education or vocational training. So, they may see education not as an empowering tool but as a source of personal frustration or leading to disengagement from lifelong learning. Okay, next, cycle of negative behavior. Okay, the most concerning long-term social effect is the perpetuation of negative behavior in our future generation. Students who experience trauma in the form of mistreatment, harsh discipline, in turn replicate these behaviors as adults. So this cycle can manifest their own parenting, work habits, and social interactions. For example, a parent who was subjected to corporal punishment as a child may resort to similar tactics when disciplining their own children, passing on a cycle of trauma. So additionally, students who grow up in environments marked by fear and punishment may develop aggressive or antisocial behaviors. So this may result to violence, bullying, negative behavior in their interaction with people around people around them. So this cycle this cycle of the negative behavior can be broken, but it requires targeted interventions, including education on emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and the importance of positive discipline methods. So, for the conclusion, the long-term social effects of poor discipline and teacher misconduct are profound and wide-ranging. So these effects not only influence the immediate well-being of students but can shape their future relationship, their careers, and their mental health. So to mitigate these consequences, it is crucial for the Malaysian education system to integrate mental health support, positive discipline strategies, and trauma-informed care into their curriculum. So school must adopt a more supportive approach to discipline that emphasizes a personal growth, respect, and psychological well-being, rather than punitive measures that reinforce fear. So teachers should be trained to recognize the signs of trauma and provide the necessary support to students who need it, because policies need to ensure the students who experience bullying or abuse are given the resources and help they need to deal. Okay, so fostering inclusive, empathetic school environment is important, not only for the success but for their healthy mental health for the society long term effect. That's all from me. Thank you.
Continue with the presentations. From here, I will discuss more on the workaround or the mitigation plans in order to resolve the issues of bullying, abuse, and discriminations among by teachers in Malaysia. So first of all, the strategy is that we need to strengthen the legal framework. First one is by enforcing the Educations Act 1996 more strictly. How this actually helps? So by having this act, it sets the legal foundations for education in Malaysia, including the teachers' conduct and students' right. So strict enforcement ensures that existing regulations are not just symbolic, but also it shows that it is actively used to protect our students' right. And the impact, of course, schools and teachers will be more accountable, and students will know aware of their own rights. Second one is introducing harsher penalties for teachers' misconduct. How this actually helps resolve the issues is that by having tougher penalties such as a deterrent against bullying, abuse, and discriminations, teacher, of course, they will think twice before engaging in any misconduct, and repeated offenders can be swiftly removed from our education system. And then the third one is we also need to strengthen the Child Act 2001 in schools. So the Child Act emphasizes focus on the protections of children's rights, including their safety and as well as their dignity. So by applying it more directly in school settings, it ensures that students are seen and treated as individuals with legal protections. Impact, of course, it will bring impact to the abuse. The abuse of authority in schools would be legally challenged and empowering students, both students and parents. Next one is we also need to establish a national student protections policy. So how does this national student protections policy can helps resolving the issues is so having a dedicated policy would provide clear and centralized guidelines for preventing and responding to any misconduct. And additionally, it also creates consistency across schools and ensures no child is left behind without a clear path to report and seek justice. And last but not least, we should also increase transparency in handling any misconduct cases. So, publicly tracking and reporting misconduct cases helps hold our educational institutions accountable and promotes a culture of openness and safety. So, these will eventually create independent we can also create independent investigation bodies, which will encourage victims to come forward and discourages systemic silence or any denial of wrongdoing. So these also, of course, increase the public trust in our school system, and the justice will be served fairly and transparently. All right, now let's move on to the second strategies on how to resolve the bullying discriminations among teachers. The second point is teacher training and awareness. So how teacher training and awareness can resolve these issues. The first one is that by we need to implement a mandatory ethics training for all teachers. So how mandatory implementing mandatory ethics can actually help. So ethic trainings helps teachers understand their professional as well as their moral responsibilities, especially in regards to the students' welfare and equity. And for example, so some of the teachers they may not recognize making a sexist or racist joke as a form of discrimination. Okay, mandatory. So by having a mandatory ethics training, it could actually prevent cases like back in 2022 incidents where teachers in Johor make a rape joke claiming it was just a joke. So it started from a simple remarks, but it actually became a big issues. So by having this sort of strategy, teachers will become more aware of their boundaries, respect, and professionalism, as well as reducing the likelihood of abusive or any biased behavior. The second one is that we need to incorporate students' right educations in teacher training. How this helps? Many teachers they are unaware of the legal and moral rights students hold. By having training in students' right under the Child Act, Educations Act, UNCRC, United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, it would actually reinforce the duty of care. All right, and for examples, a teacher who really understands that students have a right to dignity, safety, and freedom from any discriminations, from any discrimination, is less likely to punish them harshly or make any demeaning comments towards them. Okay, moving on. The impact, of course, it will reinforces a right-based approach in education and will eventually strengthens the protective role of educators. Okay, and the third one is that we need to conduct workshop on positive discipline technique. Why is it important to conduct this kind of workshop? So because some of teachers they rely on physical punishment or public shaming maybe due to the lack of alternative. By having a specific training in positive discipline, it introduced methods like conflict resolution, restorative practices, as well as behavioral guidance without any giving any harms to the students. For example, so instead of shouting at or hitting the students for any misconduct or misbehavior, a well-trained teachers they might use a reflection activity or a structured dialogue in order to address the issue. We need to take example best practice from Finland, which is a well-known country. They incorporate a corporal punishment ban, and they use a positive reinforcement and social emotional learning techniques in order to maintain any discipline issues. The fourth one is raise awareness about the psychological impact of teacher misconduct. The teachers often underestimate the long-term harm caused by any verbal abuse, humiliations, or discrimination. For example, a student in Sabah who was repeatedly mocked for her weight by one of the teachers eventually dropped out due to self-esteem issues. So with the proper awareness training, teachers could recognize it as an emotional abuse and the impact it will actually promote empathy and emotional intelligence among teachers and reducing any harmful interactions. Last one is we need to implement peer monitoring and mentoring program. The seniors or well-trained teachers they can guide and correct the some of the newcomers teachers or those struggling with any classroom management. For example, a junior teacher who tends to shout at students, they might want to improve themselves after shadowing a mentor who uses a calm or more effective discipline strategies. Additionally, so this will actually create a culture of accountability and a continuous improvement among the teachers. All right, moving on to the third strategy. Now, how encouraging a safe reporting system can actually resolve bullying, abuse, and discriminations by teachers in Malaysia. So first of all, we need to establish confidential reporting channels. Now, how by establishing the confidential reporting channels can actually help. Now, many students they are afraid to report abuse due to fear of embarrassment, disbelief, or any retaliations. Confidential system, for example, having anonymous forms or secure digital apps can actually provide a safe space for them to speak up. For example, back in 2022, there was a case of students in Kelantan endure a month of emotional abuse because she fears being punished for disrespecting her teacher. Now, a confidential reporting channels might actually have allowed her to report early without any fear. Okay, so impact, of course, the impact so the students can actually report any misconduct without putting themselves at a personal risk or leading to early interventions. Second one is we need to strengthen the school-based counseling services. So how school-based counseling services actually helps resolving the issue. Counselors play important roles and they serve as a trusted adults for the students in order to confine and especially when the abuse is subtle. For example, psychological when it involves psychological bullying or favoritism or any microaggression. For example, if students experiencing of subtle racial discriminations or remarks, they might be more comfortable discussing the issues with a well-trained counselor rather than maybe like the school principals or the usual teachers because they have that expertise. So they know how to get the information from the students. But the current gap is that many Malaysian schools have limited or overburdened counseling services with little focus on abuse or discrimination cases. Okay, and the impact is, of course, they will provide emotional support while guiding our students to reporting channel safely and effectively. Safely. Next one is we also need to introduce some national helplines for students' protections. A centralized by having a national helplines for students, a centralized helpline it will give our students a direct line to authorities outside of the school or the institutions. This will ensure an oversight in cases where school fails to actually act, maybe due to this transparency between the cases. For example, in Singapore, they have the Tinkle Friend and Touchline services that actually help the students to seek help outside of the school system. So a similar Malaysian helpline can empower students who feel isolated or ignored. By having this, it actually bridges the gap between student voice and the national actions, ensuring serious cases don't fall through the cracks. Next one is we need to protect our students from retaliation. Many of the students they fear that by when they report, it would actually lead to being targeted or punished or socially excluded. By having a protections policy, it will actually guarantee the students that they're not going to be punished for speaking up or voicing out their cases or the issues that they have been dealing with. For example, students in Selangor who reported a teacher's sexist remark was later ignored in class and received unfair grading. So this actually discourages others from reporting and actually telling what's the real thing happened behind doors. Okay, so by having a guaranteed protections through anonymity, anti-retaliation law, students will feel safer to report and school staff will think twice before reacting punitively. Last one is we also need to conduct awareness campaigns on reporting rights. How this by creating awareness actually helps resolve the issue. So many of the students they actually don't know that they actually have their own right to report any abuse or how to do it, how to seek help. So having an awareness campaign by maybe assembling any posters, videos actually helps students to recognize any misconduct and act confidently. Again, last but not least, let's discuss on how the roles of parents and community can actually resolve bullying, abuse, and discriminations by teachers in Malaysia. So first of all is we need to strengthen the parent-school communications. We're having an open, regular communications channels, for example, through Parents-teachers meetings and digital platforms can actually help detect an early signs of abuse or mistreatment. For example, when the parent noticed some behavioral changes in their child, but it wasn't informed earlier, it wasn't informed about the disciplinary actions at school. So by having a better communication, such red flags can actually be identified and investigated faster. So we see that when parents are in the loop, schools are more cautious about how students are actually treated and issues are addressed before the problem escalates. The second one is you also need to encourage more of a parental involvement in monitoring students' well-being. Now, how this actually helps is so when parents are actively involved in school life, when they're, for example, through volunteering, attending any events, checking on emotional well-being, so they will become allies in safeguarding students. For example, in some Malaysian schools, parent associations, we call it PIBG, they help flag issues like excessive punishment or any unfair treatment. So their presence can discourage any misconduct and promote transparency between teachers, the community itself. So of course, students feel more supported, and teachers are more aware of more accountable, knowing that parents are actually actively involved and engaged with their children. Okay, so the next one is community-based awareness campaign. It's actually how this actually helps. So by having a community-driven efforts like having a town hall, religious center talks, or youth club workshop, it actually can help educate the public on what constitutes teachers' misconduct and why it actually matters. For example, in Sarawak, there's a local NGOs have run some rural awareness programs on child rights and school safety. So this actually encourages the villagers to speak up if they notice any school-based abuse, right? And of course, this will bring impact. So when the broader community they're more aware and well informed, there will be less tolerance for abuse and more pressures on institutions to act ethically. And the fourth one is we also need to provide external counseling and support system. Now, how this go about? So we need to access to independent support services, for example, such as community counselors, local NGOs, or child advocacy groups. It actually gives students and families alternative if schools actually fail them. For example, in cases where a student is mistreated, but the school administrations protect the teacher, having access to an external child support NGO allows the issues to be brought to be pursued further. So hence we can see that this actually breaks the monopoly of internal school systems and ensures every student has a support network outside of the school walls. And the fifth point is actually we also need to promote a culture of respect and accountability. Now, schools that work with families and local leaders to promote values like empathy, fairness, and accountability, it actually create a more positive and protective environment. For example, in schools in Selangor, they actually involve community leaders in anti-bullying campaigns. We have seen a more decline or declining in both peer and teacher misconduct. This actually eventually impact the cultural change happens when respect becomes like a community value. It's not just a school based rule. All right, so before we end the discussions, I'm going to share a little bit about the case study of a successful resolution case. So the case is about a teacher misconduct in a Malaysian school, becomes a turning point for the policy change. So the incident happens back in 2021. So a secondary school student in Malaysia is reported a case of verbal abuse and public humiliations by a teacher. So the teacher repeatedly made racially insensitive remarks and mocked the student's academic abilities in front of the classmate. So how the case was handled? The case was actually handled. So the students, with the support from the parents, reported the issues to the school principal. So the school initially dismissed the complaint, but after media coverage and the social media awareness, the case actually was escalated to the Ministry of Education. The ministry conducted an investigation, a thorough investigations, and the teachers were suspended pending disciplinary action. So the actions taken for resolution. School actually introduced a stricter code of conduct, COC, for teachers, ensuring so all the staff members attended ethics and student rights training. A confidential reporting system was actually established for the students to safely report misconduct without fear of retaliations. And the school actually increased mental health support services by assigning dedicated counselors to help affected students. And of course, the outcome has been positive. The students became more well informed about their own rights and how to report to teachers to any misconduct by the teachers. And there's also some policy improvement. The school since then has actually revised its disciplinary framework to ensure stronger actions against unethical teachers. And the community support, so because of the case, encourage more parents' involvement and advocacy groups to demand better protections for the students. So what we have learned from the actual case is that student voices actually matter. So speaking up led to real changes in school policy. Transparency and accountability are crucial. Independent investigations ensure fairness in handling the case. And an ongoing monitoring is also necessary. So school must continuously review and improve student protections measures in order to prevent all of these issues and making sure that no children's is left behind in seeking justice.